I co-chair with Howard of the Leadership Forum community. And today, many of us aren't okay. There's been a slew of events that have lasted over our lifetimes. And it's really hard for many of us to be able to even concentrate. So I want to first off thank Joel for sending out a message on behalf of the Leadership Forum community and our board. And I also want to ask everybody to join me in a moment of silence for 3 lives that were lost this year. Ahmaud Arbery, he was killed running down the street in Georgia. I just got back from a run, and so whenever I go on a run, I think about that. George Floyd, which you've seen the video, and I haven't watched the video as I cannot bring myself to do that, but he's another one. And Breonna Taylor, who her home was broken into by some agents and she was shot, and it was the wrong home. They thought her home was a drug home. And so these have been very sad and unfortunate events. And before we do the moment of silence, I want to ask people a couple of things. And Joel put some of these things in the email. But first off, please just check on your Black colleagues. We're hurting right now, and I don't think anyone needs to feel like that's out of line. I've gotten dozens and dozens of messages, and I think we just really need you to join us in this. And so reaching out. Also, longer term strategy, and Joel and I have been talking about this. This is not the time to put together a 100-page strategy, but it is a time to start thinking differently and thinking about how can we incubate Black leaders specifically. How can we do more for Black businesses and incubate more Black leaders. But the last thing I'll say is, before we go into the moment of silence, is just recognize that everybody's not okay right now. I've talked to some Black employees at some places and companies, and imagine what that would feel like if your team didn't recognize you. I mean, this is a big loss. Imagine losing someone important in your family and no one ever recognizes it. Well, that's how a lot of Black employees feel. They feel fearful, they feel dismissed, and they feel invisible. So it's up to all of us to connect, and I hope you all join me on this journey and the Leadership Forum community on this journey. So now if you could join me for about a 30-second moment of silence. Thank you. And I will, before I hand it over to Joel, I want to announce that tomorrow during our coffee hour, we will have a breakout group specifically dedicated to discussing how we can support Black people in these times. Thank you, Joel and Chris. I'll hand it over to you now.
Great, Latanya, thanks. I really enjoyed connecting and talking with you and some other colleagues yesterday. And the bridge that I want to make into our topic for today really comes from a quote that we collected when I was at CCL. And it was about democratizing leadership. So there's a chapter that's actually a handbook for leadership development that a couple of colleagues wrote. And the quote here says, "Where you come from, this leadership teaching may result in better management, better business practices, but here in Uganda, this teaching has the ability to save lives. This region, these governments have been at war for many years. If they heard today what you were teaching us, I believe we could end many of these conflicts. We could see an end to these wars." So just kind of given the context of what we're all going through, Chris and I are deeply passionate about democratizing leadership and scaling leadership. And so keep keep our context in mind as we go through today and think about how can we incubate leadership in many, many more people. So Chris, I'll advance the slide here.
Great, great. If you guys wouldn't mind in chat, and this is definitely a bridge as well, what are the benefits of providing development to everyone? And then what are the challenges? If you could take a moment to throw some thoughts up in chat as we give a couple seconds to answer this question and wait for any stragglers to join.
Scroll down here and mute your microphone.
See inclusivity of input, acceleration of buy-in, benefit of gaining multiple perspectives. David, if you could elaborate on your thoughts in chat a little more. Benefits include that leadership approaches that everyone approaches situation with a leadership mindset, asking one how can make change. Collective capacity, absolutely. Helps to be our best selves. We're all leaders in our own right. Thank you, these are great thoughts. Promoting equity in organizations, more connected society, unlimited benefits. Yes, how can we know what future leaders will bring? Great point, great point. The development of what kind of leadership is also a question. Great point, Lyndon. Leadership development is inherently value laden.
Good to see some of the challenges coming up that are being identified too. Some people don't get the chance, and those in power don't let them. Challenge of mindsets around what makes a leader, that's a great one too.
Good thoughts, great thoughts.
And the one of, challenges.
Challenges, mindsets, yep, around what it makes a leader.
And not everyone believes in the value of all people and their ability to become leaders. That's a pretty big one too. Well, thanks for everyone's participation in the chat. Those are fantastic comments, seem to be really well thought out. And, I did already share a little bit about democratizing leadership development, but, that term goes back to, as I said, when I was at the Center for Creative Leadership, Lyndon, who's on this call, I think he pretty much coined it with some other colleagues there, and they wrote a chapter. And so democratizing leadership is a much bigger movement that we're all probably connected and a part of. It's been in the roots of the Leadership Forum. But I just want to acknowledge that there is a history that we're building on here, and we'll share a little bit more. And then, Chris, I know we wanted to go into the poll here. So Matthew, at what age should leadership development begin? We're going to try and put a poll out there. Great, and go ahead and submit a vote. At what age should leadership development begin? Well, somebody's just voting through chat and says at birth. So Renee, I don't debate that at all. So thanks for adding that. And certainly early childhood psychologists would say that there's some great truth to super early leadership development. All I ever learned, I learned in kindergarten, right? I don't mean to bias anyone's voting here. Matthew, why don't you show us how this is starting to break down? Great. So when you look at those percentages,
that's interesting. Everyone, Everyone says by 17. It should start by 17.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and in some ways not a surprise to a group that probably is joining a leadership conversation. You know, I think we all recognize it to be a little bit of a muscle. The earlier we can start to do it, the better it will become. And so from some research that I did while I was at CCL, I ended up co-authoring a paper called Expanding the Leadership Equation. We'll be able to send it to you maybe post-program. But from 462 different executives, different leaders in different sectors, we really ended up finding this data. And what's interesting is, our data is even stronger, saying that the journey should begin earlier. But regardless, fully 50% of respondents say that it should begin before they're 11 years old. And fully 90% actually say that it should begin before they're 18. And I think this group is pretty savvy in recognizing, or the fact that we're all still learning, and really leadership development is a lifelong journey. So let's keep that in mind as we go through today and some of what we're going to share with you. So we want to talk to you a little bit today about leadership development, and really the driving question for my career and much of what Chris and I have begun to partner with is, what would the world look like if all young people had access to leadership development or developing leadership skills? So just sit with that question and ponder it for a second. What would the world look like? Think of our context, different challenges. And I'll ask you to hold that question in your mind as we go through today. And some of our agenda. Chris, do you want to jump into our agenda?
Just, we're going to talk about a framework that we put together to process leader development across the lifespan, to think about the things that can be impacted. As development as still in its nascent stages, as you compare it as an educator, if we compare it to something like math or reading, where a couple hundred ago people thought that these were abilities that only a few people had. That's no longer the predominant narrative. Now we think that 99% of the population plus can learn how to read, can become proficient in math. But we've established set pedagogies and structures around that. Leader development is not as far advanced, but we're going to share a framework which we hope takes a small step in helping educators and other leader development professionals process what goes into this big picture. Then we're going to talk a little bit more about how to use that, and then we have a call to action and some next steps.
Great. So, what is slow leadership? So basically, kind of our value proposition, what we're trying to do is we want to develop a nonprofit specifically to focus on supporting K-12 educators and providing the next generation of leadership development content so that all young students can have access. So this is about equity and access. And, to put it in a different language, how can we be the Khan Academy of leadership development? How can we provide educators in a broad sense with a way of organizing their efforts, and mean by a process for considering and supporting leadership journeys. And so what we've heard and what we know, having done this work for a number of years, is that leadership development is historically for people of privilege. You're either pushed into it, you're identified as a leader, or when you're a middle level manager, you are provided the opportunity to get leadership development. And we want to pivot this and make it for everyone, because what we've heard from people that graduate from different programs, very senior leaders, is they say, I wish I got this when I was younger. So we want to go from this being something for a 1% audience to how can this be a part of every student's educational experience? And so what we're starting to see with schools that are doing this work is we are starting to see that there is a correlation between increased engagement, belonging, and grades with schools that are now starting to integrate leadership into schools. And so this is helping students be citizen ready, ready for futures of being a boundary spanning and cut across all the differences that leadership skills help one lead in. And so when I was doing some research this past fall, I went out and I talked to a number of different educators, and no different from what many of us would say is there's a whole bunch of different ways that we all think about leader. But it was very poignant to hear this coming from a principal in Durham Public Schools that said, boy, if you were to ask all 53 of our senior leaders, you would get a different answer. And so why is that a problem? Because no subject would be taught with such ambiguous definitions in education. And so what educators need is they actually need a framework. So one of the first things that Chris and I started to develop is how do we organize this work? And I got to give a shout out to Chris on this because, you know, having worked at CCL, done a lot of leadership work, you know, Chris said, we need a framework, because Chris and I are co-authoring a book right now. And he's like, we need a framework. And I'm like, you know, I'm so steeped in some of CCL's work that it's hard for me to pivot from those frameworks, you know. And I'm like, you know, leading self is something pretty consistent, and learning and leading with others is foundational to some of what I've learned. And I said, as I went through the thought exercise with Chris, you know, I said, you know, boy, you know, if there's something that we need to do better, we need to provide more project-based opportunities, because that's where young people really get an opportunity to try out and step in. And Chris said, no, not projects, practice. And so we actually weren't going to create SLOPE as an acronym, but as we started to put together the pieces from youth leadership development, adult leadership development, it started to create this framework. At one point, we actually were thinking about adding another E on it and calling it sloppy, because leadership development is pretty sloppy. Our journey is a little bit messy, but we ended up landing on SLOPE, and you'll learn a little bit more about that.
So the categories will be familiar to you if you're already in the leader development space, but it's a way to think about different areas that we need to populate growth in, whether we work with students or whether who are youth, or whether we work with adults. So we think about the self in terms of understanding and improving who you are and how you lead yourself. Learning is bifurcated into both continuous learning, which happens across all these different categories, and then that functional learning, which is necessary to be a leader in a certain field. For example, I know a good bit about education that is empowering if I'm going to be a leader in the education space. My brother-in-law is an executive in an engineering company. I could not step into that situation because I do not have any functional learning expertise in the engineering field. So that's the way to think about the two areas of learning. Obviously, leadership is about working with others, and this is a complex process on our journey, but we need to keep filling and contributing to our understanding of how we work with others in order of leadership journey. Joel hit a little bit on the practice area. I think in education, this is an area of huge opportunity. How can we create those opportunities for students to try and learn and fail and grow? I just saw someone in chat say, my 3-year-old just asked about what leadership muscle means. That's perfect. Just like if we don't work out, our muscles don't grow. If we don't practice our leadership development, our leadership muscles won't grow. So how can we create those avenues and opportunities for everyone, not just people that we think are leaders, and we can tap and say, oh, you've got what it takes, right? How can we create those opportunities for everyone to explore their leadership? And then, of course, the environment, you're expanding awareness about the challenges and opportunities that exist in your context. This comes out of a situational approach to leadership, saying that, you know, leadership isn't some reserved gift that only a few have, but we all have opportunities and situations that we can find and step up and become leaders in. And this is true whether you're in the kindergarten classroom, helping someone, encouraging your classmate not to knock over someone else's blocks, or whether you're the CEO of an organization. So these are the categories. We'll dive in a little bit more to what this means, because I know it's nascent, but we're going to do a breakout first. But we do want to recognize that we realize it is not a linear journey, right? So for many of us, the leadership journey looks a lot more like this, with peaks and valleys, and sometimes we fall back, and hopefully we get back on our feet and try again. For those of you who want to do a little parallel, if you're familiar with the horizontal and vertical leader development frameworks that exist, we think this model maps onto that nicely. If you want to learn more about that, we can share at another point. So now we're going to move into some breakout rooms just to think about this concept on a personal level. And I like choice. I think that's part of the educator background of students love choice. So you can either choose either or. You can think about how SLOPE could provide a map of your personal and professional leadership journey, considering each category and the impact that that had on your journey, and think about what category presents the current greatest challenge and how you can continue to develop in the different areas. Or if you're visual or an artist, or want to try the other path, you can draw a picture of your SLOPE leadership journey, much like that last picture we showed. Over the course of your time and your life, when did your leadership journey accelerate, plateau, decline, and how did this relate to other timings of events in your life? So we're gonna put you in breakout groups of 2. You can have a few minutes to work on this task. We'll give you a 5-minute warning as a time to wrap up the individual work and move to sharing. If you want to move to sharing sooner, that's your choice.
And for
yes, self-learning. This is a question about the acronym of SLOPE: self-learning, others, practice, and environment.
And if for some reason when you're paired with somebody, if you're not paired with somebody, meaning just a phone or just a screen went in there, just come back to the main room and Matthew will help hook you up, and we might have a triad going on. So Matthew, thanks for pushing people in there, and looking forward to seeing you and hearing from you on the other side.
I'm sorry, Matthew, can you shoot me back where I was?
Yeah, no problem. I'm
No.
actually bringing everybody back very briefly because
Oh, okay, it wasn't me then.
yeah, no worries. No, I was supposed to do it for 10 minutes. But do you know which room you were in by chance?
All right, I'm just getting things back set here. So in your chat, we just want people to share what they take away from their SLOPE conversation. So just take 30 seconds here and enter something into chat about the conversation you just had. How maybe SLOPE helped you. Good to see how much a good conversation with Charlie. Maria, go to you. Welcome back. Good to see you out there.
Oh, it's a pleasure to see you.
Good to see some common issues. So let's see, Charlie, common issues in SLOPE between here and India. Are you saying some connections between other frameworks that might exist in India?
That's exactly what I'm saying, yeah. Particularly at the academic level.
Great, good to see that.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, girls are limited by the environment. Not going to comment on all of these. Sometimes we can extrovert on people too much.
I'm pleased, though. I read a lot of positive conversations, and that's great.
So thanks for continuing to add out there. We're going to keep things moving because we do have limited time and we want to get to a few other things here. And so,
so the next part that we're going to move into is how to use this SLOPE framework in program development. And when we're talking about leader development across the lifespan, we recognize that it's going to look fundamentally different. But I think the process will be similar. What existing assets and strengths do you have that you're already doing within the SLOPE framework? What areas do you need to supplement based on the needs of your students or clients or co-workers? And then how can you create more of an individualized leadership learning opportunity or pathway with practice opportunities for everyone? So that's the basic process. Each bucket within the SLOPE framework, we think of them, each category, we think of them as buckets that need to be filled. And these buckets are never completely filled across our lifetime. I think as we grow and learn, our challenges become different. We get increased understanding, and then we're finding we have to relearn some of the things we thought we knew. We knew it at one level of an organization or in one style of leadership, and then we have to relearn. So these buckets are never completely filled. But what we contend with this framework is that if you are attuned to all 5 different buckets, then you actually are doing leader development, whether you call it that or not. And that's one interesting thing in education. If you can go to the next slide, we end up with so many different terms in the leader development world that encompass these concepts, but are called different things. You may be familiar with some of these, definitely if you're in education, and some of these are definitely strong in the corporate space. So take a minute and just absorb that. But it's not possible to fill everyone's bucket at once at the same time. So how can we treat everyone with that individualism on their journey and create patterns and programs to fill their buckets as they need them?
And Chris, one thing to add is, we've talked about how, each school might have different ones of these, and those could actually be filled into the 5 different SLOPE categories, right? So not all schools are doing all of these. In fact, when they are trying to do it all, they don't have an organizing framework. They don't have a way to integrate it all.
Absolutely, and that's where it comes back to really assessing what you're doing well, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses. Now, for some people, this slide is overwhelming. I want to recognize that, but for some people, it's very helpful to start to dive into, okay, what are some of the constructs that you can, or things that you can fill each bucket with, so to speak. And I mapped, in this chart, you'll see the START items are mapped on the CASEL, which is an organization that focuses on social emotional learning, and also constructs from a framework for 21st century learning. But I pulled these from several different leader development models and frameworks that exist, just to create kind of a macro perspective on what it could be. Of course, we know we can't accomplish these all at once in one day. So then it becomes a pathway or a process. I did want to pull out another quote that I love from an advisor who did some of the best work on leader development across the lifespan. Her name's Susan Murphy. And but she cautions that, so a list of competencies may provide a comprehensive view of leadership development requirements, but does little in explaining the process of leadership, and may end up being a laundry list of the things that every competent person should do, right? And I think that's always the tension we have in leader development, because we see, oh, that's a leader does this, everybody needs that. And that's what it seems, that's why we focus on creating this personalized pathway and journey, filling the buckets of SLOPE as appropriate for the people that you are working with and for you as an individual.
So we do want to go ahead, Chris.
Go ahead. No, go for it.
Yeah, so we do want to put people back into a breakout room for another conversation. That's something that the Leadership Forum really believes in, is how can we make meaning together. So you do have an either or here that you can choose. And really the first one is honoring, of course, the context, the reality that we're faced here. You know, LaTanya spoke about it at the beginning of our session. You know, hey, you know, think about George Floyd, somebody that might be struggling with, you know, what's going on, and how could SLOPE help you have a conversation with them to support them on their learning and development journey that they're on. Or if you sit in an organization, how could SLOPE help you organize your efforts within an organization? How is a leader currently developing? You know, what can you do for integrated solutions that could be created? So this is your either or here. Matthew, I'm guessing you will put these in chat again so that everyone have them. We'll make sure that before we push people in, Matthew just added those. Thank you. And you'll be pushed into a group of 4, so you'll have 10 minutes. It will be harder to take. You know, everyone needs to take some turns on the conversation and speak to what's on your heart and mind about how SLOPE could help you develop other people as leaders. Thank you, Matthew. Everyone enjoy your conversation, and we'll see you back here on the other side. It's left here, and so we're not going to do a large group report out, but we would invite people again to add a comment into chat. So how does the framework help you better understand the leader development journey across the lifespan? So if you're working with young people or you're working with older people, how can SLOPE help you? And maybe what questions are surfacing about the framework? We'll give you about a minute before we pivot. Again, I'm going to try not to extrovert on people and give them a little thought space here. Now I will start to comment on some of the comments out there. So Carly, it looks like you and your group had a good conversation, and Anna Maria and Susan. Great. Whoops. Lynette, great. Howard, yeah, empathy is powerful. SLOPE is a good tool. Good to hear it, Kathy. Thanks for the continued out there. I'm going to begin to move into a few other slides, but please feel free to add to comments, respond to others, and apologize if we're having to have you focus on 2 different things, the screen and chat. I know sometimes I get confused out there when so many things are going on. And Todd, I will pause on your question. What does it mean to be a leader of oneself? I'm going to invite somebody else into answering that. Just go ahead and take yourself off mute, or actually let me do this. Please respond to that in chat, and that way we can keep moving here. And Todd, I'll follow up with you too, of course, but I'd love to hear others' thoughts on what does it mean to be a leader of oneself. Somebody respond to that in chat. Great. So with just a few minutes left, I did want to close out around some next steps that, next steps really that Chris and I have here. And so I mentioned that we want to be a platform. We want to provide a platform for educators. So that's what we're working on developing. And we have a little bit of a call to action that we're going through. And so what we've built out here, and Allison on chat out there is with Participate, and they've provided a grant to start to populate a platform. We will provide access to everyone that's on this call and in our community. And the Leadership Forum has also received a small grant to use Participate as well. So Participate, Allison, thanks for being a good partner here to us. And so what we've done is we've really built some features into how we want to develop the SLOPE framework and the SLOPE platform. So we needed an organizing framework that we've talked about. And what we hear from educators is that we need a single source stop. We need somewhere that we can go to, because there's stuff that's wild and crazy and good out there on the internet, but it would be great to save time to go to a place. And it would be great to go to a that is educators by educators. So something that educators have tried and they've used and vetted to some degree. So we really want to partner with educators in developing this. And then how do we also build in a degree of professional support for educators that are still learning on their leadership journey around how to do this? And so this is what the Participate platform begins to look like. On the left here, you can see there's some different features where there's an announcement feed. There's a course that ultimately we'll be able to build badging into. There's discussion conversations, and there's resources. But on here, you can see that the SLOPE platform is actually, or the SLOPE acronym is built out. And so within each of these categories, there is the self bucket, the learning bucket. And this is just a prototype. Please, when you are looking at the resources and going on to this platform, and I gotta say, I'm a little nervous, and being transparent, I'm feeling the pressure of perfection and prototype, right? And so, you always want to put something out there polished and perfect, but we actually don't want it to be polished and perfect right now, because we want to invite your feedback in, and we want to build this with educators, people that are doing this work. So moving on here, how can you help? So we like to think that we're a part of this broader democratizing leadership so that all people can have access. And we really want to think about, hey, are there introductions that you can make to educators, to schools, to potential sponsors, funders, corporate partners in this? But this is where we're going, is we really deeply believe, that the world could be a very different place if all young people had access to leadership development. And the one place you can do that is in schools. But we're all educators. And so how do we think about SLOPE being something that over a lifetime can also help somebody on their journey? Howard, I'm recognizing it's 1:01, and I know you had a meeting at 1 o'clock. So I don't know if you're still there to close us out. Otherwise, LaTanya can, but thank you all for your time.
I'm still here, and Joel and Chris, and to all of the 40 plus participants in today's dialogue, thank you very much. And I certainly see SLOPE as being highly transferable to all of our kind of communities that we work in, whether that's educational or, within the community itself, or within businesses and so forth, or with our families. I mean, it's just highly transferable. So thank you, Chris and Joel. Next week, we have a great session, and it will be how can we incubate leadership from leading self to leading others. Rachel Adams will be leading that session, and it will be on June 10th. So we simply would invite you all to participate in this and invite a couple others so that we can expand the community that we call the Leadership Forum community. And have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. We'll stay on, and if people have any questions in time, we'll be here, but people might be late already. Thank you for joining us, and it's a pleasure to get your feedback. Please give us feedback, and we'll send you information on stuff.